I knew something had shifted the moment my daughter-in-law handed me a name tag that said Carol Family Friend. She pressed it into my palm with both hands. The way you'd offer something fragile to someone you weren't sure could handle it. She was smiling. She's always smiling. It's the kind of smile that never quite reaches the corners, the kind that's been rehearsed in a mirror until it looks almost real. Just easier this way, she said. Some of the investors don't know our whole backstory. You understand? I looked down at the sticker. White background, black letters. My own name made foreign. I said, of course. And I stuck it to my blouse. Because that's what I do. I accommodate. I smooth things over. I have spent 67 years being the person who makes things easier for everyone else. And some habits are harder to break than others. But I kept the name tag. I kept it in my coat pocket long after the night was over. Because I knew, even then, that I was going to need to remember exactly what it felt like. My son Jason called me 6 months before the grand opening. It was a Tuesday evening in late October, and I was grading papers at my kitchen table. I'd been teaching high school English in Columbus for 31 years, and even in retirement, I still kept the habit of sitting at that table with a red pen in my hand, though now I used it for crosswords and grocery lists. Mom, he said, and his voice had that particular pitch he's had since he was 9 years old, the one that means he wants something big. I need to talk to you about something. He and Rebecca had a plan. They'd been building it for 2 years, a full-service catering company targeting corporate events and upscale weddings. Rebecca had the connections. She came from a family that moved in those circles in Cincinnati. Charity galas, country club fundraisers, the kind of events where the shrimp cocktail costs more per head than my monthly electricity bill. Jason had the culinary training, 5 years in professional kitchens after he left college. A real talent for food that I'd watched grow since he was a teenager, burning grilled cheese in my kitchen. Together, they had the vision. What they didn't have was capital. The number Jason quoted me was $175,000. I didn't flinch. I'd learned long ago not to flinch at numbers when my children needed something, because the moment you flinch, they feel the weight of the ask, and I never wanted my son to feel like a burden. That's a lot, I said, instead. I know, Mom. I know it is, but the venue lease is the big piece. Once we have the kitchen space locked in, we can start taking contracts. We already have 3 clients interested. Rebecca's cousin has a foundation gala in April. It's real, Mom. This is real. I asked him the questions I was supposed to ask. What's the business plan? Have you talked to a bank? What's your timeline to profitability? He had answers for all of them. Prepared answers, which told me Rebecca had helped him rehearse. That was fine. I didn't mind that. I minded other things later, but not that. What I told him was that I needed 2 weeks. What I actually needed was to call my financial advisor, liquidate 2 certificates of deposit I'd been holding since my husband Gerald passed 4 years before, and sit quietly in Gerald's old armchair for a long evening thinking about whether this was wisdom or weakness. Gerald would have said, "Carol, you can't buy your children's love." He said that once, gently, after I'd written a check to cover Jason's car loan when Jason was 26 and irresponsible with money. I'd told Gerald that wasn't what I was doing. Gerald had smiled the way he smiled when he disagreed but loved me too much to push. I thought about that now, in his chair, with the lamp on and the house quiet. Then I thought about Jason at 14, sitting at this same kitchen table, crying into his hands because the other kids had laughed at his shoes. I'd gone out the next morning and bought him the shoes he wanted, even though I couldn't really afford them, and I'd never told him that. I called Jason on a Thursday morning. "I'll do it," I said. "But we're doing this properly. I want a partnership agreement. I want my investment documented. Not because I don't trust you, because this is how you protect a business." "Of course, Mom." "Absolutely." My attorney, a woman named Sandra Park, who'd handled Gerald's estate, drew up the agreement. It was clean and fair. I held a 30% silent partnership stake, no operational role, no interference in day-to-day decisions, but no major financial decisions, no property transfers, no additional debt above a certain threshold without my written consent. Jason signed it, Rebecca signed it, I signed it. We took Sandra out for lunch after, and Jason ordered the most expensive thing on the menu and left a $20 tip on a $40 tab, and I said nothing. The business launched. It grew faster than I expected, honestly. Rebecca's network was real. By the following spring, they had a waiting list. By summer, they'd expanded the kitchen space and hired 4 full-time staff. Jason sent me photos sometimes, the platters, the setups, the tablescapes that Rebecca designed. It was beautiful work. I was proud of them. I told myself that regularly. I was proud. And the distance between us was just geography, just the busyness of their lives, just the natural drift of a grown child finding his footing. I told myself that for 18 months. The grand opening event was Rebecca's idea. Not a grand opening in the traditional sense. They'd been operating for over a year, but a formal launch party. A rebranding, she called it. New name, new logo, new commercial kitchen space that they'd renovated and expanded. They were calling it Hearthstone Occasions. Beautiful name. I'd always liked the word hearth. Jason called to invite me in early March. It's March 22nd, Mom. Can you make it? I drove from Columbus to Cincinnati, 6 hours, with a stop in Dayton for gas and a sandwich. I arrived at the venue at 4 in the afternoon, an hour before the event began. The building was a converted warehouse space near the river, all exposed brick and industrial windows and Edison bulbs. It was stunning. The kind of place you see in magazines about young professionals transforming old cities. Rebecca met me at the door. She was in a black dress that cost more than my car payment, and her hair was in one of those architectural updos that require both a professional and a significant amount of personal confidence. She hugged me. She always hugs me. Both arms. One beat, release. Carol, you made it. How was the drive? Fine, I said. Long. Isn't it? She looked around like she was seeing it for the first time, though I suspect she'd looked at it exactly this way 100 times. Jason's in the back. He'll be out. Listen. Before people start arriving, she reached into her jacket pocket and produced the name tag. She explained about the investors. There were 4 of them, 2 from Rebecca's father's firm, 2 from a venture group her college roommate's husband ran. They didn't know the funding history. They'd come in later, after the business was established. And the story of the early days was, in Rebecca's word, streamlined. Streamlined, I repeated. We just want everything to feel cohesive tonight. Professional. You know how investors read rooms? I nodded. I put on the name tag. I told myself it was one evening. Jason found me near the appetizer table about 20 minutes later. He looked wonderful. He'd filled out since his 20s, broader in the shoulders, more settled in himself. He was wearing a well-cut gray suit, and he had Gerald's eyes, something that still surprised me sometimes. The exact same, quiet, brown, patient, and kind. He hugged me longer than Rebecca had. Mom, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad to be here, I said. And I was. I was genuinely glad to be standing in the beautiful space my money had helped build, watching my son become something. Then his eyes dropped to the name tag on my blouse, and he didn't say anything. He just nodded slightly, the way you nod when you've already agreed to something uncomfortable and you're hoping no one mentions it. Rebecca told you, I said. It's just for tonight, Mom. The Harmon Group guys are very particular. They've got a whole narrative they've bought into about how Jason and I built this from scratch. She hadn't said this to me. She'd implied it, but she hadn't said the words built from scratch. I let them settle in the air between my son and me. Of course, I said. You look wonderful, Jason. He touched my elbow briefly. Try the salmon bites. We did something new with the dill. Then someone called his name from across the room, and he was gone. I took a glass of wine from a passing tray. I found a spot near the window that looked out over the river. I stood there for a while and watched the water move. The guests arrived. They were exactly who Rebecca had described. Finance men in expensive casual wear, their wives in jewelry that caught the Edison light, a few younger couples who worked in marketing or real estate and spoke exclusively in industry terms. They circulated. They complimented the food, which deserved every compliment. They asked each other about their weekends and their children's schools. A man named Harmon, one of the investors, introduced himself to me. He was tall, with a kind face, and a handshake like a closing argument. And how do you know Jason and Rebecca? Before I could speak, Rebecca materialized at my elbow. His love of food started in her home economics class. Isn't that right, Carol? I had never taught home economics in my life. I taught English literature for 3 decades. I looked at Rebecca. She held my gaze with absolute composure. Something like that, I said. Harmon smiled warmly. That's wonderful. The best ones always remember a teacher. He moved on. Rebecca disappeared just as smoothly as she'd appeared. I stood with my wine and my white name tag and my 30% silent partnership stake, and I thought about what Sandra Park had said when she drew up that agreement. This protects you, Carol. Make sure they understand that. I had assumed I was protecting the investment. I hadn't understood yet that I might also need to protect myself. I found Jason once more before dinner, near the kitchen pass-through where he was checking plates. I touched his arm. He turned. Home economics teacher, I said quietly. He had the grace to look pained. Mom, 30 years of English literature, Jason. I could have at least been an English teacher. He almost smiled. Almost. Then it fell away. I know. I'm sorry. It's just complicated tonight. How complicated is it? I asked. Not angry, just clear, because from where I'm standing, it looks like a room full of people who think you built this alone and a name tag that says, I'm someone you used to know. He looked at the floor. It's one night. Yes, I said. It is. I walked away before he could say anything else. I went to the restroom, locked the door, and stood at the sink for a moment. I looked at myself in the mirror. 67 years old, gray hair I'd stopped fighting 3 years ago, the small pearl earrings Gerald gave me for our 35th anniversary, and a name tag that said Carol Family Friend on my chest. I peeled it off, folded it in half, put it in my coat pocket. Then I went back out, poured myself another glass of wine, and spent the rest of the evening being exactly who I was. I didn't announce myself. I didn't make a scene, but when Harmon's colleague asked me what I did, I said, I taught English for 30 years, and now I'm a silent partner in a catering business. Best investment I ever made. And when his wife asked which business, I said, this one. Actually, Hearthstone Occasions. The salmon is particularly good tonight. She looked surprised. Harmon's colleague looked curious. Jason, across the room, was watching me. I held his gaze and smiled. Not meanly, just enough. The drive to the hotel that night took 12 minutes. I sat on the edge of the bed with my coat still on, and my purse in my lap, and I thought about what I wanted to do. I want to be clear about something. I am not a vindictive woman. I did not raise my son to be someone who would introduce his mother as a stranger. So I will not pretend that was simply who he turned out to be. He was taught better. The person he'd become in that room was a performance, and like all performances, it required someone else to play the supporting role. I had played it for 18 months. I was tired of the part. I opened my purse and took out my phone. I found Sandra Park's contact. I didn't call. Not yet. It was 10:30 at night, and Sandra charges by the hour. But I opened a notes file and I wrote down 4 things. Partnership agreement, 30% equity, consent clause for major decisions, review options. Then I slept better than I had in months. Jason texted at 8 the next morning. "Hey Mom, you doing okay? Heading to brunch with the Harmon group but wanted to check in." I replied, "Doing fine. Coffee's good here. Drive home is this afternoon. Let's talk soon." He sent a thumbs up. I put the phone face down on the nightstand. After checkout, I drove not toward Columbus, but toward the office park on the east side of Cincinnati, where Sandra Park kept a satellite office for clients in the area. I'd called ahead. She had 40 minutes between 9 and 10. She was exactly as I remembered. Compact, precise. The kind of woman who chose her words like she was billing for each one. She shook my hand and poured me coffee without asking if I wanted it, which I appreciated. I told her what happened. All of it. The name tag, the home economics teacher, the investors who believed my son had built something from scratch. I told her about 18 months of distance, of photos sent instead of invitations, of a grand opening I'd been invited to attend as furniture. Sandra listened without interrupting, which is a skill. When I finished, she turned her notepad over. "The partnership agreement is solid. You never amended it?" "No." "And the consent clause for major financial decisions?" "Intact, as far as I know." "Has there been any major financial activity you weren't consulted on?" I thought about this. They expanded the kitchen space last fall. Significant renovation. I wasn't asked. Sandra made a note. "That may constitute a breach depending on cost thresholds. Do you have access to financial statements?" "I'm entitled to quarterly reporting under the agreement. I haven't received any in 6 months." She made another note and allowed herself a small, controlled exhale. "All right, here's where you stand. Your partnership stake is real, documented, and legally binding. Non-reporting alone gives you grounds for formal inquiry. The kitchen renovation may be a secondary issue, but more importantly, you have the right to formally assert your partner status at any time. In writing. On record. I don't want to destroy what they've built," I said. "I want that to be clear. The business is good. What do you want?" I thought about the name tag in my coat pocket. "I want to be seen," I said. "Not celebrated, not thanked, just seen. And I want my granddaughter to know the truth about where things come from. My grandson, too, when he's old enough." Sandra nodded. "Then we start with a formal partner assertion letter. Restates your stake, requests overdue financial statements, references the renovation. It's not aggressive. It's a reminder." "Quiet," I said. "As quiet as possible. That's how we do it." She had the letter drafted by the following Wednesday. I reviewed it, suggested one change, and approved it. It was sent certified mail to Hearthstone Occasions LLC, attention Jason and Rebecca Calloway, on a Thursday afternoon. I drove home to Columbus and waited. The call came on Saturday morning. I was in the garden, pulling up last year's dead lavender, my knees on a foam pad, gloves up to my wrists. I heard my phone ring from the porch and I let it ring. When I came in and checked, I had one missed call from Jason and one from a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be Rebecca calling from her personal cell rather than her phone she usually used to call me, which was a tell. I called Jason back at my own pace after I'd washed my hands and made tea. "Mom." His voice was tight in the way a rope is tight just before it snaps. "We got a letter." "I know." "From your lawyer?" "Yes." Silence. Long enough for me to take a sip of tea. "I don't understand why you'd stopped. Started again. Why didn't you just call me?" "I tried other forms of communication," I said. "For 1.5 years. That's not fair." "Jason." I set my mug down. "I drove 6 hours to watch you open the business I helped build. I wore a name tag that said I was your old teacher. I smiled at men in expensive shoes and told them the salmon was wonderful, which it was. I've been calling and texting for months to schedule a proper visit and been told you're busy, the business is demanding, Rebecca's schedule is complicated. I'm not calling the letter unfair. I'm saying it was necessary. Quiet on his end. I could hear something in the background. A kettle or a faucet. The ordinary sounds of their kitchen on a Saturday morning. The renovation, he finally said. We should have consulted you. I know. Yes, we were moving fast. It felt like we thought you'd want us to just handle it. I'm sure you did. Another pause. Then, lower. Rebecca's upset. I had expected this. I imagine she is. She thinks you're trying to take something from us. What I'm doing, I said, is reminding you that I'm part of this. I don't want to run the business. I don't want to attend every event. I don't want a seat on some imaginary board. I want my name on the wall. Somewhere small, even. I want my grandson to know when he's old enough that his grandmother helped build something real. And I want quarterly financial statements. As agreed. Jason was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed. A notch softer. Younger somehow. Mom, the home economics thing. Yes, that was wrong. That was Rebecca's idea, but I went along with it and I shouldn't have. No, you shouldn't have. I'm sorry. I let it land. I didn't rush to fill it with forgiveness or diminishment. I just let it sit there in the air between us, across 6 hours of Ohio highway and 18 months of drift. Thank you, I said finally. That matters. We stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a reconciliation in any Hollywood sense, but it was a conversation. An actual one. The kind where both people say hard things and neither one hangs up. Before he got off, he said, "What happens now?" With the letter. That depends on what you do next, I said. 2 weeks later, Sandra received a formal response from Hearthstone Occasion's attorney, a reasonable man who clearly understood the lay of the land because his letter was accommodating without being servile. They acknowledged the overdue reporting. They would provide all quarterly statements within 10 days. Regarding my partner's status, they proposed no changes to the existing agreement and confirmed their understanding of the consent clause going forward. They also included, as a separate enclosure, a proposal. They wanted to add a page to the About Us section of their new website, a brief history of the business. It would mention that Hearthstone Occasions was founded with the support of a private family investor whose belief in the vision made the early years possible. It wasn't my name in lights. It wasn't an apology printed on the menu. But it was the truth, tucked into a corner of the world where anyone who looked could find it. I called Sandra. "Is this enough?" "That's not a legal question," she said. I thought about it for 3 days. I went for long walks. I sat in Gerald's chair again in the evenings. I called my daughter Claire in Portland, who is the practical one in the family, the one who always asks the question I'm trying to avoid. "What do you actually want, Mom?" she asked. "I want Jason to be the man I raised him to be," I said. "I think he's working on it. Then give him room to get there." I approved the proposal. I sent Sandra a 1-line email, and she handled the rest. The financial statements arrived 10 days later, exactly as promised. I sat at the kitchen table with my reading glasses and a notepad and went through them the way you review anything important, slowly, without rushing to conclusions. The business was healthy, genuinely healthy, better margins than I'd expected, responsible with debt, growing steadily. I was, in a straightforward way, proud of them. I marked a few questions for Sandra, sent them over, got answers back within the week. Everything was in order. Spring turned to summer. Jason called more regularly. Not every week, but more than before. We talked about the business, about his stepkids from Rebecca's first marriage, who were teenagers now and apparently exhausting, about a new chef he'd hired who was exceptional about a charity gala contract they'd just landed that would be the largest single event in their history. He didn't mention the letter again, neither did I. We talked around it and through it and past it, the way families do with the hard things that have already been said. In July, they brought my grandson Oliver to Columbus for a weekend. He's 8, gap-toothed, obsessed with trains, and he has his father's quiet brown eyes. Rebecca stayed in Cincinnati. She said she had a consultation. I didn't push it. These things take time. Oliver and I spent Saturday at the Science Museum and Sunday in my kitchen, where I taught him to make biscuits from scratch the way my mother taught me. He stood on a step stool to reach the counter and took the whole process extremely seriously, pressing his small palms into the dough with tremendous concentration. "Grandma," he said, while we waited for the oven, "do you have a restaurant?" "No," I said. "But I helped your dad start his. He considered this. Like an investor?" I laughed out loud. "Yes, exactly like that. Dad said you're a partner." "I am." He nodded, satisfied. "That's cool." And then he went to go ask me if we had any trains to look at, because he's 8 and his attention span for financial structures is limited, which is appropriate. In September, the website went live with the new Our Story page. I looked at it on a Tuesday evening, sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of tea. It was well written, which I appreciated given my former profession. It talked about the founding vision, about the warehouse space near the river, about the early contracts and the growth. And there it was. In the 3rd paragraph, let's note, Hearthstone Occasions was made possible in its earliest days by the faith and support of our family's first investor, whose belief in this vision turned a dream into a reality. It didn't say my name. I'd expected to feel diminished by that, but I didn't, not exactly. It was a beginning. More than I'd had in March. I called Jason that night. He answered on the 2nd ring. "I saw the website," I said. "Yeah?" His voice was careful. "It's a good story," I said. "Well told." I heard him exhale slowly. "We're working on a lot of things, Mom." "I know. She's not easy to change. But she's not a bad person. I know that too. We want you to come for Christmas. Actually, come. Stay in the house," Oliver's been asking. I hadn't been asked to stay in their house before. I'd driven out twice since the business launched and stayed at the same hotel both times and told myself I preferred the privacy. I hadn't preferred it. "I'd like that," I said. "Mom." He paused. "The name tag thing. I think about it." "You don't have to." "I do, though. I think about the look on your face when you saw it." Another pause. "I was a coward." "You were," I said. "You're working on it." He laughed once, short and a little raw. "Yeah." We talked for an hour. About nothing significant. About Oliver's train phase and the gala and a recipe Jason was developing with butternut squash. About Gerald and a story Jason had forgotten about his father teaching him to drive in an empty parking lot. About small things, ordinary things, the kind of conversation that doesn't sound like much, but is actually everything. Christmas came. I drove to Cincinnati on the 23rd and stayed in their guest room, which was small and warm and had a bookshelf with actual books in it. Rebecca greeted me at the door. She hugged me, both arms, one beat, release, and then she looked at me for a moment, something unreadable in her expression, and said, "We're glad you're here, Carol." I think she meant it. Or she was working her way toward meaning it. Either way, I said, "I'm glad to be here." And I meant it completely. On Christmas morning, Oliver woke up at 5:30 and was not successfully redirected until 6:15, which is impressive by any measure. We opened gifts around the tree, all of us in pajamas, the kind of morning that has no performance in it. Rebecca made eggs and Jason made biscuits, not as good as mine, which I told him, and which made him throw a dish towel at me. After breakfast, Oliver disappeared into his room with his new train set. Jason and Rebecca cleaned up. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and watched the light come through the windows. Winter light, pale and honest. I thought about a name tag in a coat pocket. I thought about a certified letter and an honest phone call and a paragraph on a website and a bookshelf in a warm guest room. I thought about how long it takes people to find their way back to each other and how you have to stay close enough for them to make it. That afternoon, Jason sat down next to me with his own coffee. Just the two of us for a moment, Rebecca in the other room, Oliver orchestrating a complex rail emergency. "I want to ask you something," he said. I waited. The partnership. When it eventually transfers, whether that's restructuring or buyout or whatever eventually makes sense, would you ever consider putting your stake into a trust? For Oliver? I looked at him. "I've been thinking about it," he said. "About what you built, what you gave us. I don't want Oliver to grow up not knowing where things come from." It was exactly what I had wanted, without ever having said it. I set my mug down. "Let's talk to Sandra together," I said. "The three of us. Set it up properly." He nodded. "Yeah, that's what I was thinking." We sat there for a while in the quiet kitchen, my son and I, while Oliver's trains went around and around on the other side of the wall, and Rebecca hummed something soft to herself, and the winter light did what winter light does. Not every wound closes fast. Not every story ends in a single good conversation. But sometimes, if you hold on to what's yours long enough, and if you're honest without being cruel, and if you stay in the room, even when the room is uncomfortable, things find their way towards something better. I am 67 years old. I taught English literature for 31 years, and I know more than most about the shape of a story. I know that the endings that mean something are never the loud ones. They're the quiet ones. The morning light through a kitchen window, a dish towel thrown in affection, a grandson who knows the word investor and thinks it's cool that his grandmother is one. They're the moments when the name tag is in your coat pocket and it doesn't matter anymore. Not because it was forgiven, but because it was faced. Because the truth, even when it arrives slowly and imperfectly, eventually arrives. And it was always going to be enough. If this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs to remember that quiet strength is still strength, and that the people who love you, even the ones who lose their way for a while, sometimes find their road back home.